Okay, today, as I said, we are going to talk about money. What is money? Well, what's money is a very complicated question. Why is money important is no less complicated than the first, but still, I think it could be an appropriate starting point. Why is money important? You know, we keep saying that money is not a basic subject matter of economics, because economics is about the allocation of scarce resources among alternative uses, right? So the costs and benefits are not usually expressed in monetary terms, in terms of money. We talk about real things. And in microeconomics, of course, we assume that rationality requires that only the relative prices or real prices matter in the decision-making process of individual households and firms. So money simply is a medium of exchange. But since the introduction of macroeconomics in the 1930s by Keynes, well, maybe this is not really true. Since the 19th century, especially within the classical school, we have an approach that can be called appropriately as macroeconomic approach, because it's about the behavior of the whole economy, etc. But strictly speaking, macroeconomics was brought into economics by Keynes himself with his book published in 1936. Sorry. The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, or Money and Interest. Interest and Money, I guess. It's specifically written about employment, and especially maybe money, because Keynes usually said that money is important in the production process. So he calls his theory as a kind of monetary production theory. So he talks about monetary production economy in general. Usually in the classical school and the neoclassical school, there's no such thing as the monetary production theory, because there are two blocks of the theory in the classical and neoclassical schools. One block is about the real variables, you know, employment, output, etc. And the other is about the monetary side of the economy. It's about money supply and money demand, of course, and also general price level, the famous quantity theory of money, which was first introduced in the, 18th century, even before that maybe, but it was formulated by David Hume, an important philosopher also. And this theory states that whenever there's an increase in the money supply, then price increases, general price increases will follow. So whenever money supply increases, there will be inflation. The only cause of inflation is money. Increases in money supplies. This theory was adopted by the classical writers and also neoclassical ones. So even today, there are many mainstream economists who are of this same opinion. That's quite interesting. It has a long history. Actually, this history of the quantity theory begins with the introduction of Spanish gold and silver into Europe in the 16th century, you know, stolen from Americas, today's Mexico and Latin America in general, Aztecs, Incas, and so forth. So there was, in the 16th century, there was a great stream of precious metals, gold and silver in general, to Europe, to Spain first, actually. So they started to circulate within Europe as well. Since then, economists keep talking about the effect of this introduction of money. We are talking about a coinage system, actually, or commodity. money system in general. So in this case, money is basically formed by gold and silver and sometimes copper coins in general. There were some banknotes also starting with the end of the Middle Ages introduced, but their volume was not that great, but an increase in their volume also is a significant characteristic of development of capitalism throughout Europe, because money is a medium of exchange. It is required in the exchange processes. So increase in the supply of money will bring about increases in the exchanges or transactions in general, right? This is what basically quantity theory says. Well, at that time, actually, there had been two effects of this introduction of gold and silver into Europe. One effect was the increase in employment and output in general. Increasing money is also necessary for the development of capitalism in terms of increases in the economic activities and transactions in general. So in order to meet this demand, increases in demand, there had been an increase in the output level, also employment level. So it has some real effects, but at the same time, prices will also increase because this elasticity of supply in general was quite low during the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the modern period. So it wasn't easy to increase output instantly. There had been some increases in the price level. So in other words, both price levels and the output level, economic activity increased at that time. Since then, as economists, we keep discussing this issue, the effect of an increase in the money supply. It may increase output or real variables, or it may increase only monetary variables, price level. Sometimes, or generally both, actually. In Keynes, for example, Keynes argues that if the economy experiences a less than full employment level or unemployment, then increases in money supply may increase economic activity and employment. So it is possible that there may be an increase in the output level and employment, of course, without any increase in price level if there's a high rate of unemployment. During the 1930s, the situation was like that. The 1929 crisis, the Great Depression, there were great decreases in the employment level and output level, increases in unemployment, and slowing down the economic activity. So it was a global problem at that time. Great Depression affected all countries in the world. So Keynes advocated some increases in the money supply by the central bank as a cure for this problem. You all know the connection. When the money supply increases, interest rate will decrease, which will induce investment. Investment will increase, therefore, aggregate demand and output will increase. But Keynes also warns us that this may not really happen because of some problems. One problem is that the interest elasticity of investment is low. Whenever there's any decrease in interest rate, the investment may not occur, may not rise as much as the decrease in the interest rate. And also an increase in the money supply may not decrease the interest rate because of what Keynes calls the liquidity trap. The interest elasticity of money demand is infinite. So whenever there's an increase in the money supply, all increases will be held by individuals and it will have no effect on interest rate. So in this case, again, this chain of causation will not work. So instead, Keynes argues that fiscal policy is a better tool by increasing government spending, especially, rather than decreasing the taxes, is a better policy option to increase employment or to decrease unemployment. And again, since Keynes, we keep debating about the effect of the money increases in money supply. Here, of course, there's a very interesting and important distinction. The classical and the neoclassical school argues that money is demanded, held by individuals for the purposes of exchange, because it is only a medium of exchange. It is used in exchanges, transactions, economic transactions, buying and selling, right? So if we have money at our hand, there's no point of holding it, but to spend, we need to spend it in order to have greater utility and so forth, right? From your microeconomic classes. But Keynes argues that, okay, money is a medium of exchange, but at the same time, it's an asset, it's a financial asset, it's a form of wealth. People want money, want to hold money, demand for money, because money is the most liquid asset, capital, good, so to speak, in the sense that it can be transformed into any other kind of asset without great cost, right? What is money? These days, money is, there are two definitions of money. Remember, narrow definition and the broad definition. Narrow definition, coins and the money in circulation, and also demand deposits. And the broad definition also adds the time deposits to this picture. So in that, especially with respect to the narrow definition, we can say that it's the most liquid asset, because without any loss, you can buy a house by using your money. You can spend on consumption goods, you can spend on other goods, capital goods, etc., etc. So Keynes argues that money is also a store of wealth, which creates the problem, you know. Remember Say's law? John Baptist Say said that, let's see, and aggregate demand is always equal to aggregate supply, because whenever there's an increase in the production of any goods, an equal increase in the purchasing power will occur. An equal increase in the purchasing power will be created, actually, because if you want to produce a specific good, you should use factors of production, labor and capital. And the owner of these factors, there should be some payments to these owners, wage, interest and rent. So whenever there's an increase in the output level, an equal increase in the distributive shares, totally, rent, wages, and interest, keep forgetting this. So always aggregate demand will be equal to aggregate supply. But Keynes says that if people hold some part of money because it's a financial asset, they will not spend this amount, right? If you don't spend this amount, Say's law will no longer be valid. So Keynes's theory is based upon a rejection of Say's law in general, and he explains this by the lack of what he calls effective demand. So these are issues, but this debate on money is a very old one, and also it has some interesting issues associated with it, actually. You know, you guys all know Freud, Sigmund Freud, the psychiatrist, psychoanalysis, founder of psychoanalysis. And Freud argues that money is, well, I'm not going to say the word, but money is an S word. money is associated, according to him, with the development of the child that corresponds to a particular phase, which is the Oedipal phase. You all know the story of Oedipus, right? Oedipus was a Greek guy and who killed his father and married with his mother. So gods didn't like it and cursed him, etc., etc. So this period, especially, sometimes it's called the anal period, is the period in which the child or the infant learns or goes through the toilet training, right? That some children, maybe most, if not all, hold their thing. They don't let it go away, right? The S thing. Because they attribute some power to this particular excrement, I would say. It's a part of the body, so they are not willing to depart from that particular and powerful part of the body, so they keep holding. That is his theory. And this actually phase is sometimes reflected in the adult behavior, but this time it is converted to the love of money. You know, money is, when we talk about gold in general, it's yellow, so you can connect the dots, right? Basically. So sometimes money is called as filthy lucre. So there's a psychiatric explanation about this. Even interestingly, Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, talks about this and some psychoanalytical foundations of monetary theory, not in his general theory, luckily, but in his Essays in Persuasion, which was written or published in 1933 before the general theory of value. It's an interesting book. And I would suggest you to read it as well. Anyway, this is one discussion, one debate surrounding money, money's psychological foundations of the monetary theory. That's an interesting thing, but economists do not like this aspect of money in general. But economists are, since the beginning, by beginning, I mean basically the oikonomia thing, you know, oikonomia, oikos science of the oikos and so forth. It is closely related to ethics, and according to Aristotle, as we talked about, ethics is about the realization of potentials, and this is a social affair in the sense that this can only occur within a society, within the polis itself. So whatever is good for the polis is also good for the individual, for the person in general. So basically the autarky or self-sufficiency can only be achieved in a self-sufficient society. Self-sufficiency of individual depends on the self-sufficiency of the polis, in other words. This is the basic idea of ethics. Where is money here? Money, the trade on money, actually, usually interest on money in general, is considered by Aristotle and by most of the Greek philosophers, and also by the philosophers in the Middle Ages, or by the fathers of the church in general, were condemned as being unethical because it may create a danger for this aim of self-sufficiency. Because, you know, if you want to accumulate money, this will create a danger for the solidarity of the society in general and individual interest will become important more than the interest of the society in general. Therefore, money is wrong. Well, behind this is the idea that money is basically, money cannot create some value. What is value? Of course, it's another thing, but what is valuable can be linked, and it is linked actually, to the notion of ethics. Something is valuable only if it's useful for the society in general, according to this perspective. And money, in this sense, is sterile. It doesn't create any new value. So trade on money, exchanges on money, or banking, banking is a more recent institution, but there were some trades on money, even in the ancient Greece and in ancient Rome. Forerunners of the bankers, we can say, and they care about their own interest, of course, and they would create a danger for the society as a whole. So these people who once usually for lending money in general were condemned, and they were considered as bad people in the sense that their behavior is not ethical, is not directed to the objective of self-sufficiency of the polis of the society in general. So money is, exchanges of money is a sin, even if it's not a sin, it's not ethical in this perspective. So money is not capable of creating any value. And also there has been a confusion between interest rate and profit rate in general since the dawn of history, we can say. Also, even today, sometimes we talk about interests and profits as the same. Some monetary institutions today say that they do not pay any kind of interest as you deposit them as individuals. In return of these deposits, they do not pay any kind of interest, but they do pay some kind of profit, right? What's the difference between profit? The difference lies in this idea of value, actually. By itself, money cannot create an additional value. A closely related idea to this conception is a notion that we still use today, actually. It's called value added, right? Remember, what is value added? Value added is the difference between sales price of a commodity and the costs of production in general, right? Including profit. Profit usually within neoclassical economics or microeconomics, profit is considered as a kind of cost item, actually. Of course, there's this distinction between, in the neoclassical economics, in microeconomics, this distinction between profit and supranormal profit, right? Supranormal profit means basically as a kind of surplus. Remember, whenever there is perfect competition in the short run, there may occur some supranormal profits higher than the normal profit. But in the long run, all firms will get, under perfect competition, of course, will get normal profits. So this distinction is closely related to that of profit and interest in the Middle Ages or in ancient Greece, basically. It is the same idea, actually. Because surplus is not a just category. It's not fair to pay this surplus. But this is different from what we call today normal profit. So when we talk about costs of production, we say that for labor, we pay wages. For land, we pay rent. For capital, we pay interest. And for the share of the entrepreneur, we pay profit, right? These are all costs items. The profit that is paid to the entrepreneur is actually the normal profit. It's a kind of cost item. So in the long run, a firm will cover its costs with the selling price. Actually, the selling price must be equal to these production costs, including normal profit. But over these costs, there may occur some kind of surplus, which is called supranormal profit, higher than normal profit, right? It is the same idea. Normal supranormal profit is a kind of some unjust, so to speak, category. So in the long run, under perfect competition, it should vanish. The same idea, actually the origin of this idea starts in the ancient society and the Middle Ages, basically. So trade on money is a kind of unjust category. It's not fair, but the sales price must include also the profit rate. Profit is the, well, strictly speaking, in contemporary economics, we don't distinguish between these two categories, basically. In general, on a capital asset, we'll get, or whoever gets, a kind of return, rate of return. So there's a rate of return on money, there's a rate of return on capital asset, capital good, there's a rate of return on any kind of asset, right? If we keep dollar, for example, it has some rate of return, etc. So there are many financial assets, and each financial asset will have some rate of return, and money's rate of return is the interest rate, right? Is it? Of course, we should also consider the increases in the price level or the inflation rate. So in real terms, we can say that money's rate of return is real interest rate. At least this is usually what we teach, right? But in the Middle Ages, again, the conceptions are different, and economics was closely related to ethics, as we all know. So in the Middle Ages, for example, there's a doctrine of just price. You know, a price must be fair in the sense that there should be no surplus over the costs of production. So the selling price, of any commodity must be equal to the sum of production costs, including profit, right? For this reason, trade is considered as ethical, whereas trade on money is not ethical in general. So this is an interesting thing. But in the advancement of capitalism during the 16th to 18th centuries, the era of mercantilism starts. You know, mercantilism is about the mercantile capitalism. Capitalism is based not on production to a great extent, but on exchanges, selling and buying. Of course, in order to have this selling and buying transactions, we need to have some commodities produced, etc. But, you know, this period is signified by extensive colonization, for example, killing people in the rest of the world, other than the West, of course, we talk about, and stealing the riches in general from the rest of the world. Spanish gold is a case in point, right? Spanish went to Americas and killed many people, or most people there. They stole the gold, etc., etc. So that's the basic idea. So in the mercantile capitalism during this era, the mercantilists considered money as a form of wealth, actually, interesting. Yeah, Keynes also says that. One of his source of inspiration was the mercantilists. So according to mercantilists, money is a kind of wealth, basically. But in the classical and neoclassical period, Money is only a medium of exchange. It has nothing to do with wealth in general. So if you accumulate wealth, it doesn't make any sense, unless you invest this money into investment goods and production, etc. But mercantilists want to accumulate as much gold as they can in general. Even the whole organization of the society is based upon this aim. This period is also the rise of the nation states. And there have been constant wars between the great powers at that time. First it starts with the Spanish and the Portuguese, and then it continued with the clash between Spanish and the Dutch, Netherlands Republic. Dutch states were dependent on Spain, and they declared their independency, and they formed a republic. And since then it became an important force, an important power in the seas, basically in the sea trade. And finally, after the Civil War, England came to the scene, and this time in the basically 17th century, England and Dutch were the most important powers in the States. There's this company founded by the Dutch East Indian Company. There's also a counterpart of this company in England, founded by Elizabeth, I guess. No, Elizabeth founded the 11th Company, and its fortunes were used to found the East Indian Company. Anyway, so these two companies were the most important and the richest companies throughout the world at that time. There's a calculation about this. For example, the total value of the Dutch East Indian Company were like $7 trillion in today's terms, of course. $7 trillion. Today, no company in the world has this total value. That's quite interesting. That's a period. These riches were created, were stolen, I should say. Anyway, that's another interesting issue. So they tried to accumulate money in terms of gold and silver, basically. And this gold and silver created also some inducement for investment and output. And again, at that time, this debate over the role of increasing money or the effects of increasing money on employment output started. For example, in this period in the 18th century, there was this guy named Richard Cantillon, an Irish guy, but lived in France and was killed by his, servants, I guess. And this guy has an interesting theory, which is called Cantillon effect. And this Cantillon effect is about the effect of an increase in money supply on the relative prices. Remember, quantity theory says that basically if there's an increase in the money supply, all prices will increase by the same rate, and therefore the relative prices will remain the same. But money prices will increase. So it shows that monetary policy is important in that sense. But Cantillon says that it depends on who gets this new money. There's an introduction of money into the economy. If, he says, this new money comes to the hands of the landlords, aristocrats, they will spend this new money on goods and services, right? This is the job of being aristocrat. Parties, singing, entertaining, etc., etc. So consumption will increase, which means that the prices of consumption goods increase more than the increases in the capital goods or investment goods. But if, on the other hand, this new money ends up in the hands of the capitalists or the producers, so to speak, and the prices of capital goods or investment goods increases because of the increased demand for these goods. So in any case, the relative price structure of the economy will change. This theory is very interesting, and it has some influences on the later development of economics in general. For example, Friedrich von Hayek, an important Austrian economist, develops his theory of economic fluctuations on the basis of this continuum effect. You know, at first in the, if there's a boom period, for example, the prices of investment goods will increase, and then it will follow it will be followed by the increases in consumption goods. So in the end, the only effect will be on the prices in the long run, of course, again, and until the new cycle starts, etc., something like this. So money matters, right? In this case. And Keynes also has some inspiration from this thinking, especially from the mercantilists, as I said, and he adopted the view that money is also a store of wealth. So basically, when we talk about money, these days, especially in contemporary discussions, we consider the effects of fiat money, actually. What's the fiat money? Fiat money is, fiat means basically degree of declaration, right? The government declares that this is money and its value is this, so the government or the state in general guarantees the value of the money. But in history, throughout the history, and let's see, there had been different, let's see, okay, here. Nope, not this, not that. Yes, this one. You know, coins as money started with Lydians. Anatolia, right? Basically, they invented money, and also money was used by the Greek societies, policies in general. It says, the state says that under the order of King Croesus of Lydia in 550 BC, or BCE, before Common Era, money use was started, but it was introduced something like the 700 BC and so forth. So these are the first. And here, starting from the Lydians until the end of the Middle Ages, basically, money is considered as a coin. It's called commodity money. You know, one of the commodities, usually gold and silver, is considered as money. Anything could be money, actually, as long as it was accepted by the society in general. So a commodity money is a physical good that has some intrinsic value. You know, in time, alcohol, cocoa beans, copper, gold, silver, seashells, tea, tobacco, and interesting. For example, this is one example of money that was used by some people called Yappies. Yap people. You know, this is money, the giant stone money. And another example is this. And, you know, this one of the first forms of money were used in this area, Micronesia in general. And from the picture here, you can see, so these are stone money, these are monies, right? And there are also some smaller monies. This is the Bank of Canada currency, for example, and this is this rice stone. There's that. Yet is the culture, name of the culture, society. Rice is the generic name, I guess. Stone, British Museum, London. So this is how it is transported. This is the thing, and this was transported to that talk about islands, right? This was transported by the canoes and so forth. An interesting anecdote, there is one of these stones were dropped into the sea. It was so deep that they cannot take the thing, but still they accepted this money. It's not in circulation, but it's a kind of reference money, right? As in, as if it's a kind of reserve money. Today, central banks keep reserves in terms of other currencies or in terms of gold, etc. So this is an interesting thing, but this is not practical, of course. And the best money form, the best pyramid forms are usually gold and silver. Why? Because there are some conditions for a good to become money. For example, its production cost should be high, because it should not be created whenever you want. Gold is the most scarce, I guess, precious metal in the world, and it also has some other qualities. One quality is that it never loses its value, no oxidation and so forth. And also it is gold, demanding gold, of course. And so its cost of carrying should be negligible, relatively negligible, and it can be divided without losing its value, etc. So basically, it must be durable, divisible, easily exchangeable, and rare. This rarity is important because, if you consider gold as the money, then its production depends on the production of gold in general, right? If you want to increase the currency in circulation, you should have more gold, basically. That's the basic idea, which is not easy to reproduce gold, right? So basically, this is important in restricting the supply of money. Think about in terms of the quantity theory of money. If the central bank increases money supply as much as it wants, then the result will be inflation sooner or later, right? So for this reason, some people, Austrian economists today argue that the value of money or the banknotes must be linked. The value of banknotes must be determined, must be depending on the gold itself. You cannot increase the amount of gold, therefore you cannot increase the amount of money. So this system, commodity money systems, were a historical necessity, historical occurrence, I'm sorry, starting with the Lydians, there's always, and also introduction of money as precious metal created its own problems. One problem is this idea of debasement of coinage, practice of lowering the intrinsic value of coins. For example, the early form of one of the early forms of money, electrum, used by the Greek people in ancient times, were the mixture of gold and silver, basically. Sometimes people decrease the silver ingredient of the currency to have some gains, basically. This is called seigniorage from the Middle Ages history. The lords has the privilege of casting money in general. They are the facility, basically, and some portion of this gold would be the Lord's share. You know, you have some amount of gold or silver, you go to this facility and it is transformed into coin, and some of these coin will be got by the Lord himself, usually. Then sometimes, you know, introduction of money depends or needs, requires two conditions, basically. One, it requires some kind of power. You know, printing money, so to speak, is a privilege of the state, right? No other authority or institution has this privilege because this money is backed by the power of the state, right? For example, in the old times, in Anatolia or in the Ottoman Empire, etc., whenever a new sultan or the Lord, let's say, came into power, two things actually occurred. One, this new sultan prints coins by his name, and also it declares in the mosques, basically, that he's the new sultan, etc. So still this idea is with us in the sense that the money can only be backed by the power of the state. Without any power of the state, by power I mean means of violence, right? The state has this monopoly over the means of violence, and these means of violence are used by the state, and their use could be legitimate in that sense. So basically, you can issue a money if you want. You know, you can print money with your photograph on it, etc. But if no one accepts this money that you issued, it doesn't count as money, right? But in the history, of course, whenever the sultans or the authorities, political authorities, needed some funding for their spending, they cannot increase the money because of the restrictions on gold production. So instead of doing this, they debase the money. For example, you know, one gold coin was including, I don't know, 1 gram of gold. So instead of 1 gram, they decreased the quantity to 0.5 grams, I don't know, whatever, and also add some copper, maybe. So it's a kind of debased money, right? But they still say that this is 1 gold, whatever it is. So this is an important point, actually. These days we don't do this, but instead of this, central bank issues money, right? There are two sources of money. One is the coins in circulation, right? They are issued by the government. And the other part, the paper money is issued. Paper money? No, fiat money is issued by the central bank. You know, the Keynes's basic contribution is to show the importance of this fiat money in economic activities and so forth. There are some interesting cases, for example, in history. For example, this guy. Okay, I hope you can see this. During the Roman Empire, this is tetrarchy. This is called tetrarchy. You know, the Roman Emperor Diocletian, whatever he's called, started a reform in the organization of the Roman Empire, something like 200s, I guess, or 3rd century, let's say it. Maybe the beginning of the 4th century, I'm not sure. And this guy split the empire into 2 parts, the West and the East. The East part would become the Byzantine Empire in history in later times, as we know. And there are 2 Augusts, you know, these guys here are Augusts, and these two are the Caesars. So there are four governors, so to speak, four rulers of the empire. One, Augustus, rules the western part, the other rules the eastern part, and the other Caesars, lower rulers, again, are responsible for the west and the east. The interesting thing about this statue is that actually it is in Venice, on the corner of the San Marco Cathedral, but it was taken to Venice from Istanbul. The Crusaders in 1204, I guess, right? They actually invaded Byzantium at that time, Constantinople. Constantinople was made the center of the capital by Constantine the Great. And this guy, one of these guys, actually, I guess this guy was the father of Constantine the Great, actually. And they looted many things in Istanbul and took them to Venice. Today you can see them in Venice. And interesting thing, there is this part, right? Here you can see. And the feet of the Caesar here actually was still in Istanbul. This is in Istanbul Archaeological Museum. It was found in the 1960s. So this is, anyway, returning to this Diocletian guy, one of his reforms was to try to stabilize the value of money. Unfortunately, he failed. So at that time, again, Roman Empire is the biggest force in the world. But still, inflation was a very important problem. So in time, this idea of inflation and also debasement of currency is an important problem. There's also an interesting example, for example, let me show this. This is quite entertaining. This is a coin, gold coin, introduced by King Offa of Mercia, England. There had been 4 kingdoms, I guess. In the 8th century England, Anglo-Saxon kingdoms there. One of them is Mercia, one of them is Northumbria, I guess, Wessex and Essex, you can remember these from some movies, etc. So this guy, King Offa of Mercia, issued this gold coin, but this is the front side of the coin, and this is the other side of the coin. These inscriptions are Arabic. This is a copy of Abbasid dinar. This is called Offa dinar, right? Why? Because at that time, in the 8th century, there was an expansion of the Islam empire. Abbasids started with the Umayyads and later continued by the Abbasids. And at that time, Abbasid gold dinar was the most trustable coin in the world. In the world, by the word, we mean, of course, the area of Mediterranean and other types. And King Offa was also a wise man, it seems, so he tried to develop trade and commerce in this country and also tried to connect with other people and Arabs. And he used this inscription in order to show that his money is a trustable one. It is the same value, it is the same weight, actually, it has the same weight of gold, basically, so that it can be trusted in exchanges. So this debasement is a very important problem, and it even forces people to adopt some extraordinary measures, right? Like King Offa of the 8th century. It is quite interesting. And this is another thing, the founding, one of the first banks, Medici banks, Medicis, the family, which was very important in the history of Italy, starting with the Middle Ages and so forth. This Medici Bank, founded in 1397, I guess, and for 100 years, it was the most important institution, monetary institution, so to speak, of Europe. Well, this is interesting because this is a Catholic bank. They are talking about Italy, right? And according to the doctrine of the Catholic Church, of course, usury is forbidden, right? It's not ethical, it's almost a sin, and so forth. So, but still, even under these conditions, this guy started a bank, right? Quite interesting. And instead of avoiding the religious problems, he says, actually, we're not exchanging money, but we actually change money. You know, it's a kind of, I have some, I don't know, Byzantium gold coin, and I took it to the Medici Bank, and in return of this Byzantine coin, I get some other coin, the coin used in Europe, for example. This is called arbitrage, actually. The gain, the benefit of the bank, the profit of the bank lies in the differences in the values of these two different commodities. Well, actually, it's a kind of rate of return, but still, it's not rate of interest. So it was allowed, this bank was allowed to continue its operation by the Pope or by the Vatican, basically, etc. So this is another why this was necessary. This is the Medici family, because this time, this particular period, the early modern period, the end of the Middle Ages in general, was the period, as I said, the development of capitalism, increasing exchange and economic activities first throughout Europe and starting from the discoveries, you know, the late 15th century, in the 16th century, the exchange started to expand throughout the world. Basically, this is the period of the mercantile capitalism. So basically, but the commodity money system has been used until the 1970s, I would say. This is interesting, right? We are not talking about coins, of course, the coin system. There are different forms of these commodity money systems. One is the coin system, and you know, there are usually gold and silver coins are circulated. And throughout the Middle Ages, towards the end of the Middle Ages, of course, banknotes were started to be introduced. You all know this story, right? You know, there are some bankers who keep gold as safe. So if you want to travel to another city, you go to the banker of your city and drop your gold over there. In return, you get some note, the banknote, right? So wherever you go, you visit the other city, you find the agency of this particular banker or the other banker who accepts this note, you get your gold. So instead of circulating gold itself in time, these banknotes started to be circulated. This is the starting of paper money, right? So in a commodity system, one money system, both coins and paper money are in circulation. And one of the most interesting and perfect examples of the system was the gold standard. Gold standard officially started in the 19th century, something like 1830s. But even before it was used, it became officialized by the introduction of sterling pound. Sterling means actually it's a quality of silver. I don't know what it is. That the monetary unit is the pound, and its value is guaranteed by the Bank of England. £1 includes, I don't know, 30 grams of, too much, is it? Yes. Silver and equivalent amount of gold. So whenever you have this paper money, if you go to the central bank, you can have your gold or silver. In that time, it was guaranteed by the central bank itself, but instead of going to central bank every time, we use these banknotes because their value was guaranteed by the central bank. So basically, each monies for each countries in Europe, throughout Europe and throughout world, of course, at that time. Countries that are important from an economic point of view and also political point of view, of course. And monies of each country is linked to the gold. So the exchange rates among these monies will be constant depending on the value of gold or the silver itself. Basically, this is one form of the gold standard. It worked actually something like 100 years until the outbreak of the First World War, basically. But there are some pressures on exchange rates because it's a fixed exchange rate system. So if there are some economic problems such as depressions or increases in unemployment, etc., there will be some pressures on the value of money because, you know, in the system, it's a commodity money. Gold is demanded for the purposes of money and at the same time as a commodity itself, you know, for other purposes. I'd like to keep my wealth in the form of gold, for example, and I have no intention to spend it, for example. So in this case, especially if there are hardships in the economy and the crisis and so forth, the demand for gold usually increases. So basically, the gold, the value of the paper money must decrease, etc. So, but if you keep the exchange rate as constant, there will be some problems in the economic activities, economic fluctuations will occur, etc. So when the First War began, practically this gold standard was ended. But England, after the war, for example, returned to the gold standard with the old rate, exchange rate. Actually, it was a very important mistake. That was criticized heavily by Keynes himself, by the way. There's a video clip by showing Keynes's ideas about the gold standard. Actually, it's a short video clip. You can find it in the YouTube, I guess. It's interesting. They returned the gold standard, but it didn't work, of course. Until the end of the Second World War, actually, there was no effective monetary system in the world. And in the 1944, a new system was introduced. It's called Bretton Woods system, you know, from the name of a town in the United States called Bretton Woods. There was a conference about the future of the world economy and world monetary system. And this Bretton Woods system is an indirect form of commodity money system. Actually, the US dollar, the value of US dollar is linked to gold at that time. And all other monies in Europe and other countries, of course, were linked to the United States dollar. For example, you cannot keep a dollar deposit in Europe, only in the United States. So US dollar, its value is guaranteed by the Federal Reserve. It's gold. Its gold value is something like 35 US dollar is equal to 1 ounce of gold, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So it's again an fixed exchange rate thing. If you have dollar, it's gold. amount is guaranteed by the Federal Reserve, by the Central Bank of the United States, basically. And if you have other money, franc, for example, you can change it to the dollar. So instead of keeping dollar, countries in Europe had chosen to keep US dollars. So it's a kind of benefitable. It's benefitable for everyone, but especially for the United States, because the United States is able to issue new dollars, right? Print new amount of money whenever it needs. So until the 70s, this process worked more or less efficiently, but in time, the United States increased supply of money, supply of dollar, and also there have been some euro dollars, dollar accounts opened in Europe. It's deemed that as illegal by the Bretton Woods system, but still this is what happened. So in the 1970s, the United States closed the gold window, they say. It means that the dollar was no longer convertible to gold. Convertibility means basically, it's quite free to change your dollar, exchange your dollar with gold and so forth. And the United States canceled this convertibility into gold. Since then, there's no commodity money system. Still, we keep money, but this money is basically fiat money. Each country, each state guarantees the money, the value of its own money. It is not linked to any kind of commodity, any kind of gold and silver, or any kind of precious metals and so forth. So still, this is an interesting phase in the development of the monetary system. So basically, money is a tricky subject, I would say. Tricky because it has many dimensions, we can say. On the one hand, we have some historical aspects, we have some ethical dimensions about the money, some psychoanalytical dimensions, if you will, and also. But why is money important? It's simple, because capitalist economy, a capitalist economy, or any capitalist economy, for that matter, must need to grow. Needs to grow in general. Time, this can be done through investments, right? And investments are usually financed by credits, right? In the old times, maybe the capitalists may have some fund and invest it and get some profit in return. But even, especially after the 19th century, basically, this is no longer the case. Usually, most of the investment spending are made on the basis of credits, right? So the banking system as a whole, that also includes the central bank, is the basic agency, so to speak, that regulates the money supply, right? So basically, people need credit, go to the bank, get some loan, and some of these loans will be returned to the banking system, not necessarily to the same bank, but the banking system. It will increase deposits, and these deposits will again used in credit creation, which again increases deposits, which again increases credits, etc. This is the famous money supply creation process, money creation process, right? It's called money multiplier, as we all know. So this is an important thing, because this is the point where the importance of fiat money actually enters into the picture. And Keynes was among the first economists who drew our attentions to the importance of this process in general. So capitalism always requires new investment, and new investment needs credits, and credit expansion is one of the most important problems in any economy. There's this school, for example, followers of Keynes, that is called the post-Keynesian schools, emphasizes the importance of this credit creation process, basically. For example, in a specific branch of this post-Keynesian school, there's this idea of endogenous money school. They argue that the money supply is not and cannot be controlled by the central bank alone. You know, in graphically speaking, we all know the story, right? Central bank money supply is exogenous. It is controlled by the central bank. Central bank increases money through the open market operations, right? Whenever some government securities are sold into the bankers or bought from the bankers, money supply will change. It will change interest rate, etc., etc. But these guys argue that this is not how the things work, basically. Money is endogenous. It is created by the whole system, by the whole financial system, including banks and non-bank financial institutions, especially in these days. So money supply cannot be controlled by the central bank alone, because central bank is only one of the agencies that is capable of creating money. But there are some other agencies, financial agencies, they do also have this power of creating new money, because they argue that these financial institutions are capable of securitizing their money. Actually, I should say this. I should put this way. Money supply is increased through the securitization of the loans in general. I go to the bank, demand for credit. They gave me some credit. In return, I gave them some security bond, right? That shows I'm indebted to them. And this bonds are used by the banks or the banking system or the financial system to issue new securities, new bonds, etc. So in return, the quantity of money increases to a great extent, right? So in the sense, money creation depends on the credit demand, and this credit demand will increase the deposits, and this will also increase credits again. So this goes on and on. So at one point, there will be some great amount of money that will also create some problems in the working of the economy. For example, in the 2008 crisis, there was this guy, Minsky, a post-Keynesian economist. He argues that, unfortunately, he died before the 2008 crisis broke on, actually. But his theory predicts, actually, what happened in this process, in this period. And he argues that, for example, there are some phases, stages through which a capitalist economy enters into crisis, into a crisis. So this is called financial instability hypothesis. It's something like this. Let me show this simply. Nope, not this one. Yes, this one, endogenous money. Financial instability hypothesis. Minsky, no, not this one. Okay, here. He's concerned with the relationship between credit expansion and fluctuations. Investment determines the realized profits, but the profit expectations will determine investment. So the cycle is created by this relationship, right? Constant increases in credit expansion may lead to a bubble. As the mania spreads through the economy, banks will move to even riskier areas, such as the subprime mortgage loans, leading to the 2008 crisis, which will further increase the credit expansion. This scheme will end when risky borrowers default on their debts and the general crash occurs, right? There are three stages in this period. One is the hedge finance. They can make their payments, interest and principal, from the current cash flows from investment. And in the speculative finance, riskier projects are followed by the firms. And the cash flows from the investment are not enough to cover both the interest and the principal, only it's enough to cover interest payments. And then the Ponzi Finance, from the name of the guy, Charles Ponzi, who invented this scheme actually. Revenues from the investment can cover neither the interest rate nor the principal, but borrowing is continued through the appreciations of asset values. As you have these assets, for example, you buy a house through a loan from the bank, and this bank used this loan to securitize it, to create new bonds and new financial assets. And as the prices of these financial assets increases, the value of your house also increases, so you're getting richer, etc., etc. But at some point, that is called the Minsky Moment, this bubble will collapse. The asset prices will fall drastically, market psychology changes, the bubble bursts, and the crash occurs. So this is basically a Keynesian understanding of the process, not directly from Keynes, but later economists following Keynes as the post-Keynesian economists. Basically, this story shows the importance of money. There are some interesting lessons. One is that central banks are not capable of controlling money supply strictly. Money supply is created within the financial system, and it's almost endogenous in the sense that no authority by itself can control the money. Second, as the money supply increases, the risk of economic fluctuations and even financial crisis will increase. If you can control the money supply, you cannot adopt some kind of accommodating policies, rules versus discretion, etc., right? And also, inflation is not simply a monetary phenomenon. It's a more complicated phenomenon, according to these guys. So, in other words, the quantity theory of money is not valid because increases in the money supply will also change economic activities and the real economic variables from a strictly economic point of view. And also, money changes our lives to a considerable degree, right? We all know what they are. Maybe I should stop here, right?